Hey everyone. So imagine you're crossing the border, going through the process, and then out of nowhere, 15 border agents rush your car and put you in handcuffs. It sounds a little bit over the top, but then again, it is 2025. Sounds a bit over the top, but it did happen to this musician, and today I'm going to talk about why it happened. I also have a warning from an immigration lawyer. This time I think she's from our side of the border. At least she's not gaslighting us like the US immigration lawyer, who keeps saying it's perfectly fine to go over, as long as you make sure you have the right documents in order. Lastly, a report out of Ontario on what they're going to do with their $80 million worth of US liquor. So stick around for that towards the end of the video. Today's backdrop comes from Dana, who took this photo from the Victoria Inner Harbor, lit up with Christmas lights and decorations. Victoria really does go all out when it comes to the Christmas lights. Thanks for sending this over, Dana. All right, let's get started.
Hey, Heather.
Well, Sandy, the man I spoke with was released after a few hours, but he describes the situation as scary and is worried it could happen again. This is North America's busiest border crossing, the Ambassador Bridge, which connects Windsor and Detroit. It's where Greg Williams was detained by U.S. Border Patrol last month as he tried to enter the United States with his wife and dad.
And then it was turn the car off, hands on the dash, and within seconds, there were 15 agents surrounding the car.
Now, I'm not going to question why he's going over. Everyone is free to do whatever they want. Maybe he's visiting family since he's with his wife and his father, so who knows? Let's not focus on that, but focus on the incident itself. I've actually had this happen to me before. In my case, I was at the US pre-clearance at the Vancouver International Airport on my way to San Francisco. I think this was around 2016 or 2017, somewhere around there. Everything was normal until I got to the immigration booth. They asked if I had any other passports, took a long look at me, and then told me to follow them. I was in secondary for about 10 to 15 minutes, I think, and after that, I was on my way. Before I left, I asked why I was stopped, and they told me there was another person in the US with the same name as me, even the same middle name, who was wanted and had an outstanding warrant. But in my case, I wasn't treated like a criminal. I wasn't handcuffed. I wasn't surrounded by 15 border agents. It could also be because I was still on Canadian soil at pre-clearance. I'm sharing my story to let everyone know that this kind of thing, it always happens at the border, and it's not uncommon. What's different now is how these situations are being handled. The approach is definitely more aggressive.
Williams says he was handcuffed and taken into a small room inside the nearby building. He was photographed and fingerprinted before ever knowing why he was being detained.
I wasn't worrying about being sent to some, Ecuadorian supermax, which is very much white privilege of me, that it's like, I don't have to worry about those things, but that's also like, nobody should.
That's true. You do have the right skin color. It can be a benefit, but it isn't a guarantee. So I would advise any Canadians or international tourists who are still going to the US not to rely on your skin color as a free pass. I bring up the case of the Australian woman from New Zealand who had the right skin color, but she and her 5-year-old son were still taken into a detainment facility. So be mindful if you're thinking your skin color will somehow benefit you.
Turns out there's another Greg Williams with some sort of a record that prompted the detention of this Greg Williams, an Ontario musician.
This happened because I have the same name, and that's crazy.
Williams was released after a couple of hours, but his story highlights the growing number of Canadians being caught up in the immigration crackdown underway south of the border. More than 200 Canadians have spent time in ICE custody at some point since January, compared with 137 detained in 2024. Records show at least 6 children were among those detained.
I would suspect that the conditions for those detained last year were probably better than what they are now in 2025. I wish there was more information about the 200 people who were held by ICE. I just don't have any of those details, and I can only rely on what's being released by the media. It's a bit of a shot in the dark, but if anyone watching right now from Canada knows someone who was held by ICE, I'd love to have a chat with them if they're up for it.
While a handful of Canadians had felony convictions or other criminal records, the vast majority were picked up for visa violations or less serious infractions, which experts say marks a major shift in policy.
For the most part, from what I've seen, we're looking at very minor criminal infractions, but sufficient to attract the radar of U.S. enforcement.
Experts say in the past, Canadians would have been denied entry into the United States or sent back to Canada, but are being detained more frequently.
More frequently and more aggressively. If I had to go to the US, there would probably be a million things going on in my head. What do I say? What do I do? What do I not do? Will I get a CBP agent who's having a bad day? Will they not like my appearance? Or something else entirely? I can safely say I would have zero concerns going to almost every other tourist destination in the world right now. I've even said it in the past videos. Countries like China and Vietnam, I had zero issues entering their country. I was even greeted with a welcome to our country by the border agent. Now to continue on, there's an extended version of the immigration's lawyer interview that I wanted to share with everyone. Let's check it out.
Who are being detained, both minors and adults, are related to adults who have had some kind of brush with the criminal law in their lifetime. In many cases, it is extremely minor. It may be related to visa-related offenses when they were visiting the United States, for example, or it could be related to long ago criminal convictions in Canada in relation to, again, modest things. We're not talking about people, with histories of violent assaults or violence of any kind, frankly, for the most part, from what I've seen. We're looking at very minor criminal infractions, but sufficient to attract the radar of U.S. enforcement.
I was hoping the immigration lawyer would give some examples of what minor infractions that could cause a CBP agent to categorize you as a quota target. Would it be something as minor as littering, jaywalking, speeding ticket, or something else? I honestly don't know what kind of charges there are, because I have a clean record. But my point is, whatever Canada might consider minor could still be enough as a line item on your record to cause you problems at the border.
Right? And so typically in the past, what would happen if somebody was identified in the United States without proper documentation or not entitled to the documentation they do have, they would be requested to leave. And so that at the border, they would be denied entry. If identified within the country, they would be advised that their status was expired or non-existent or whatever the case may be, and that, they should head north. People were not routinely detained ancillary to this process. So that is what has changed.
And it's changed because of the guy in the White House. He's opened the door for hate, racism, and public shaming of people who might have something small or minor on their record. Even something like an overstay by a few days or even a few hours past the limit. Now moving on, Global News has done an update on the Joint Economic Committee document that I did a video on a few days ago. If you haven't seen that video, a link to it will be in the description below. Let's hear their input on it.
Democrats in the American Joint Economic Committee have released a report raising concerns about declining Canadian visitors due, they say, to President Donald Trump's actions. The report says the negative impacts of President Trump's tariff policies have been particularly stark in states along the U.S.-Canada border, which have many businesses that rely on short-term visits by Canadians. Like in Maine, where U.S. Customs and Border Protection is reporting a nearly 20% drop in border crossings in 2025 compared with the same time last year.
Now, in that previous report, they threw out a bunch of declining numbers, and I don't agree with all of them. I still feel that some of those numbers, especially around the border crossing declines, may not be showing the true effect. But overall, when I see the struggle that every border state is experiencing right now, it tells me that we're making an impact. A few videos ago, I mentioned a US citizen who emailed me telling me I was full of hate, that I'm no different than MAGA-hating Democrats, and that I should change my platform to help support struggling US businesses that didn't vote for Trump. I've seen hundreds of comments from you supporting my simple reply of no. And that really enforces that this boycott movement is working and really how pissed off we are. I've also seen comments from US citizens supporting my stance on this as well. Some of them have said that their own country and US businesses need to learn a lesson. So I want to take this moment to thank everyone for their support in the comments on that video. About 95% of the emails I get are supportive, people sending over articles, reports, and even photos. But there's about 5% that come from self-entitled people on both sides of the border. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but really all I wanted to say is I want to thank everybody for your support.
Canada is a small percentage of our overall visitors, but it has a disproportionate impact on some of these communities.
The Democrats in the committee also cited a decrease in passengers on the Cat Ferry between Yarmouth, Nova Scotia and Bar Harbor, Maine. Last July, it reported an almost 20% drop in business over the summer. Yarmouth's mayor says President Trump's policies have played a role.
98% of what's happening is a result of that. I think it's obvious here anyway.
But Mood hasn't noticed a dip in U.S. visitors coming to Yarmouth.
They came in droves.
This is true. This past summer, we actually had more U.S. citizens coming to Canada than Canadians going to the U.S. And I personally welcome everyone who decided to come up north, unless you're wearing a red MAGA hat. I never had issues with U.S. citizens coming north, and I still don't. I'm glad they are choosing to support Canada, and some have even canceled their U.S. vacations and redirected that travel to Canada in protest of their own government. A viewer emailed me. They're a U.S. citizen who recently moved to Canada, and they were asking my opinion on whether Canadians would accept them. This is just my opinion, and even though I'm living overseas right now, this is still my stance. Any U.S. citizen coming to Canada is welcome, as long as you're not pushing the Trump policies or U.S. political beliefs in Canada. We are a completely separate country, and we should be treated as equal. How things are done in the U.S. might not be how things are done in Canada. I'm currently in Malaysia, at least for the next couple of years, and being here, I respect their way of life, their culture, their habits, and how they do things. I don't bring my Canadian or Western beliefs and try to impose them on the locals. I'm a visitor in their country, and I respect things are going to be different from what I'm used to in Vancouver. So for any U.S. citizen worried about visiting Canada, I would say don't be worried at all. Just understand that even though we're neighbors, Canada is different from your country.
And this isn't the first time a Democrat raised concerns about President Trump's trade policies impacting border states. Last June, Maine Governor Janet Mills visited New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt in an attempt to improve relations between her state and the province.
The small businesses whose families come from New Brunswick, whose families come from Quebec, those small businesses are the ones who are being hurt right now.
Oh my God. I thought the CBC interview was the only time she gaslighted us, saying that the boycott is hurting our friends and not Trump. I actually didn't know about this one. I completely overlooked it when I chose this report, so I'm hearing this for the first time. It really pisses me off, trying to guilt trip Canadians into thinking that we're hurting our friends and family in Maine. Well, Governor Mills, you can't control the border. You can't control how CBP treats us when we cross into the US. You also don't know whether these quote-unquote friends and family voted for Trump in the ballot. So don't give me that bullshit speech about how we're hurting your local businesses and not Trump. Whether you like it or not, Trump is the US government that the world has to deal with right now, and that's where it starts. I do vaguely remember this meeting that she had with New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt, and I love the fact that Premier Holt said that despite Governor Mills' plea, she could not, in good faith, recommend that her citizens visit the US. Well done, Premier Holt, for standing up for Canada.
According to the report, last year, Canadian tourism contributed $20.5 million to the U.S. economy and supported 140,000 jobs.
$20.5 million to the U.S. economy. That doesn't sound right. Anyways, I want to move on. Hearing Governor Mills just put me in a bit of a sour mood. But it's good to hear that our boycott is still making an impact. Now, I quickly want to go over some local Canadian news and what the Ontario government is doing with the U.S. liquor.
Premier Doug Ford is looking to get rid of idle American booze, but it's not going to happen this holiday season.
But it's not as easy as it sounds. We just can't sell it off. And I'm not going to do that during Christmas holidays when it will hurt our wineries, it will hurt our distilleries, and it's just not going to happen. I want to support local jobs and opportunities here. But if we find a buyer maybe in another province, that'd be different.
So still being considered at this point, LCBO currently has $80 million worth of American booze in storage. Some are expected to expire within the next 6 months. The Ontario Liberals recently called on the government to sell the liquor stock and donate the proceeds to charities. The Ford government has not shot down the idea, but said they're exploring options.
Now, other provinces like Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have already started selling their U.S. liquor stock. They've also mentioned they'll be donating the proceeds from those sales. I don't have a problem with that, as long as the provinces don't place any new purchase orders in the future. The liquor is already sitting there, and it's already been paid for. I know most of us won't be buying it anyways, So for me, if it sells, it sells. What I do know is that the US liquor industry will most likely hear that Canada is selling US liquor again, and they'll twist the story. They'll say that Canadians caved, or that Canadians couldn't resist their beloved US liquor. Hey, you know it's true. I'm just calling a spade here. Alright everyone, that's all I got for today's video. If you're still here and watching to the end, I sincerely appreciate your support, because it really does help the algorithm when you watch the full video. Have a great rest of the day everyone, and I'll catch you in the next one.